So let's talk about interest rates right now. I mean, buyers who came into the market like Mr. OL that I've been working with came into the market 2.5 years ago. Rates were like 3.
Sure.
And he passed up a couple pretty good deals and wanting the perfect house and didn't come along. So now the rates are up to just under 7, I think your last report was.
We're just under 7% on a garden variety 30-year fixed. There's, of course, variations to that. We've got the best 7-year ARM rate in town that I know of. We're 6.375 on a 7-year ARM. And that can be a good path for the right borrower. If, some people are looking to, they won't be in the house greater than 7 years.
And how many people do? I mean, really?
Well, the stats on it are changing, and that's what actually makes it pretty challenging. I mean, if you go back to the early 2000s, right, we as a population, I think we're staying in our houses somewhere in the range of 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And with this recent kind of, we had all this cheap interest rates. We've really had some tumult in the real estate market over the last 15 years. And as a population, right, the United States is staying in their house longer now, more like 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, which side of that spectrum are you on? Your garden variety first-time home buyer, they're probably not going to be in the house 7 years, right? Their family's going to grow. They're going to want to move out of that house and move on to a different property. You get somebody, in a different demographic. Maybe they're a little bit older. Maybe they're in their late 50s. They've empty nested. They don't need the house that they have now. That's somebody that might be in their house longer than 7 years. So it's really a question, but it's an option out there for the right buyer, and it's certainly worth considering. That 0.5% savings, is that saving you $150, $200 a month? Sure, it probably is, depending on how much you're borrowing, and that's certainly worth being aware of and weighing the pros and cons.
$1,500 a year. Yeah,
you know what I mean, and so it's really worth looking at and thinking about. But that's for me, that's doing the job right. Is opening someone's mind to those alternatives so that they can make, so many times people are like, well, what's your 30-year rate today? What's your 30-year rate today? Well, okay, my 30-year rate's 6.875, and somebody else is going to quote 6.85. And, does that really make them cheaper?
It's like $20 a month.
No. No, it's like 6. But, but then the question is, but how much does the PMI cost, or how much are the closing costs, or, start going down all the other litany of features that are in there. And the rate's just one of the talking points that people should be looking at. And again, circling back to, but making the right choice on the loan program, is the 30-year loan the right loan for you? Mm-hmm. That's a different question. Maybe it is. And in a lot of cases it is, of course.
But everybody thinks the 30-year fix is the way to go. I mean,
to some extent, and they do, but that's exactly my point. That what's right for one buyer is not always right for the other buyer, and having somebody who can really explain the pros and cons of those alternatives helps you know whether or not you're making that right decision. I have people who are first-time home buyers, and they'll come to me and say, "Well, I want an FHA loan." Why do you want an FHA loan? Right. They're like, "Well, that's first-time home buyer loan." Okay, well, there's better loans out there depending on your profile. And you should be aware of that. And, unfortunately, a lot of folks are, doing their research on the internet, and they feel like they've spent Saturday morning reading the internet, and now they know
everything.
Right. Hopefully I pray that, after all the time I've been doing it, maybe I've got some input on that. I understand some things that I can help people with and help them make the most effective decision, really.
Exactly. And it's not always a bad deal to buy a home with higher interest rates, of course. And we've talked about this
absolutely
before.
not.
We don't like that cliche, marry the house and date the rate. That's
right.
Kind of
that's
leading people astray.
That's a bad recipe. But there are possibilities and opportunities that we should look at, and people need to be aware of. But the interest rate should not be the litmus test for whether or not you choose to buy a house. It should, of course, be a feature
payment,
you're looking at.
The payment, what's it going to cost?
And you need to compare that payment to the alternative of rent and what's your family budget, and what's your long-term future look like?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start looking at those things, you start recognizing that despite the higher interest rates, it's still a good time to buy. Was it better if you bought it 3 years ago when prices were lower and interest rates were lower? Yes, but you can't back up and buy 3 years ago. So until we master time travel, my personal attitude on real estate is, generally speaking, hurry up and buy it, because over time it's simply going to go up, and even small percentages, a 5% increase in value on a $300,000 asset's $15,000 a year
Yeah.
that you're putting away toward your long-term future, and that's a good choice.